Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of Second Kings. Today we're in Second Kings chapter 15. And as we read through chapter 15 yesterday, we find that there are a lot of progressions that are made in this chapter as far as the number of kings that you're discussing, the time frame that you're moving through. You're going to go through nearly 100 years of history in the kingdoms of Israel and Judah in this single chapter. So, what are some things that we can learn, and what are some things that we can apply from the things that we find here in 2 Kings 15? Let's pull out a couple of things. The first one is one that comes through the entirety of the chapter, and that is the divergent courses that Israel and Judah are taking. If you'll notice, chapter 15 is going to begin with Azariah, whose other name, as we're going to see in just a second, is Uzziah. And it's also going to continue with Jotham. These two kings are going to be those that are going to do what is right in the sight of God. They are going to be good kings of Judah. And they follow on the heels of two other good kings in Amaziah and his father as well, that are going to be good kings in Judah. So you have a period of nearly 100 years where Judah has good kings. Now, they're not perfect. Everything in Judah isn't just rosy. But at the same time, they have good leadership who is generally leading them in the right direction. On the other hand, you have the kings of Israel. The kings of Israel are those who are consistently doing what is evil in the sight of the Lord. They are continuing to follow after the traditions of Jeroboam. They are increasingly going head to head against one another and taking one another out so that another may take their spot. Now, in some of these things, they are fulfilling the promises that God has made, such as the promise to Jehu that's talked about here when it talks about his family would be on the throne for 4 generations. That is fulfilled in this chapter. And yet, at the same time, you have this ever impending violence that is coming in Israel because they do not follow the law of God. And so you have these diverging courses. They're going in opposite directions. And the rate at which they're going in those directions is increasing. Such it is when you see the relationship many times of people who are trying to follow God's word, even if they do it imperfectly, and people who are not trying at all. It becomes far more chaotic, and it becomes far more destructive when God is no longer in the picture. The second thing I want you to notice is more of an observation of the style of 2 Kings chapter 15 and of the writing, and it's something we've seen already, but we see it again here, and that is that in the course of this chapter, you're actually going to have one individual discussed with 2 different names. Because you have Azariah, who is introduced in verse 1, but then throughout the chapter, you're going to see references to Uzziah. Both of these are the same person. Both of these are the same king. Why there are 2 names being utilized here, I'm not entirely certain. As a matter of fact, when you go to the references concerning him in 2 Chronicles, Uzziah is the name that is mentioned. And while Uzziah is a good king, 2 Chronicles tells us that he got rather puffed up. You have mention here of him being struck with leprosy. And that is going to be because he got puffed up enough to believe that he could offer sacrifices to God himself instead of having the priest do it, as was commanded under the law. And when the priest confronted him about it, he got angry. And so God put him back in his place, so to speak. But you have here the record of the individual Azariah or Uzziah, but you need to recognize when those 2 names are being used, they are referring to the same king in this chapter. And so Jotham is in one place going to be listed as the son of Uzziah, in another place listed as the son of Azariah, Both are correct because both are the names of the same individual. Now, the last thing I want us to notice in this chapter today, as we come into chapter 15, is the fact that Assyria is going to begin her destruction of the northern kingdom. We are going to see in the upcoming chapters the utter destruction of the northern kingdom by the Assyrians, but it's going to be a slow process, not a quick strike. And so here in chapter 15, you have in verse 29 the speaking of Tiglath-Pileser and how he is going to come down into the northern kingdom, and he's going to begin to take away the northern sections of Israel into captivity. And that's the areas that are discussed with Ijon and Abel Beth Maacah, Genoa, Kedesh, Hazor, Gilead, and Galilee. You have the northern region of Israel that is going to fall to the Assyrians. They are going to be taken into captivity. Now, he hasn't taken Samaria yet. The entire nation hasn't fallen. But this is the beginning. This is the start of the carrying away of the northern kingdom of Israel. And we will see more concerning these events as they come about in the next couple of chapters. But it all starts here in chapter 15, as the nation of Israel truly begins to fall apart. These are some of the things that I have seen in 2 Kings chapter 15. Certainly there's other things that we could discuss and other things that we could look at, but these are the things that I honed in on in my studies, and I hope they're useful to you. Next time we'll come back and we'll begin looking at 2 Kings chapter 16. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.